Hey friends, Jim Alfredson here. I posted a video a couple days ago about a sound that I created for my Pink Floyd tribute act, specifically the Welcome to the Machine lead sound. And I've gotten a lot of requests from people asking for me to give them the sound or sell it to them, which I really appreciate. That's very kind of people, that they like the sound so much that they're willing to pay for it. But I was thinking about that old adage about how you can give a man a synth and he'll be happy until he buys his next one, or you can teach a man to synth and he'll be happy with what he has. Is that how that goes? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, rather than give the sound away, which I honestly have no problem with, I thought maybe the better thing to do would be to go over how the sound is made on the Kurzweil. And this applies to not only the Kurzweil K2700, which I'm using, but everything going back to the PC3, really. This can be applied to. The more modern Kurzweils have better analog emulation. They have the virtual analog oscillators that have no aliasing in the upper range, and the filter models are better. But these same principles can be applied to any of the Kurzweils. I'm going to be specifically talking about the Kurzweil because I do think it has one of the best virtual analog engines in a digital synth in the modern market right now. Anyway, when it comes to recreating these kind of classic sounds, the first thing that I do is I think about the era that the piece of music came from. So in the instance of Welcome to the Machine, that of course is from Pink Floyd's 1974 release, Wish You Were Here, the follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon. And at the time, they weren't using too many synths. They had an EMS synthy, I believe, or EMS, maybe it was a VC3 or something. It was a EMS synth. Maybe it was a VC3. And they had a mini Moog, like that. And that was about it. So those two synths are quite similar in terms of their architecture, and they're also quite limited in terms of their architecture. So when it comes to designing a sound like the Welcome to the Machine lead, the first thing you need to do is listen to the sound, kind of try to figure out exactly how it's made, what components there are, and you can narrow that down based on what synth it was made on. My guess is it was the mini Moog, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So let's go over to the mini Moog here and see if we can start to recreate this sound on an original mini Moog. Here I am at the mini Moog. This is 1972. It's a mini Moog with the version 2 oscillators, and it's a very beautiful instrument, and maybe not cosmetically as beautiful as it could be, but I think it looks lovely. So I've already set the sound up. It's a very simple sound, and this is why I'm fairly certain that they used a mini Moog, because we have at the core of the sound is the lower octave. So I'm going to turn everything off except for the very first oscillator, which is tuned to the 16-foot range. We got quite a bit of resonance on the filter there. So that's our bass pitch. All right. And then our next oscillator is tuned 2 octaves up to the 4-foot range. And when you put those together, you get the... Now the other aspect of the sound is the glide, of course, the portamento. Right. And the other aspect of the sound is the filter. It goes, it kind of opens up, and then it stays at a certain level using the sustain feature of the envelope. So it stays about right there. And then it closes down when you release due to the decay. That's really it. It's very simple. You can dial in as much or as little resonance as you want. And of course, the third LFO in this case is being used as the vibrato. right? And then I've got the old Mini Moog trick where you feed the output back into the filter to get a little grunge out of the filter. That's it. It's quite a simple sound, really. And the key components are the oscillators that are 2 octaves apart, tuned 2 octaves apart. The closing of the filter upon release. The certain amount of resonance, and the glide. That's really it. And then on the record, they're doing the panning thing we talked about, where the original sound is on the left-hand side, and then there's a single delay or an echo on the right-hand side that's about, I said in my previous video about 250 milliseconds, but it's actually a little bit more than that. It's probably more like 350. And it's to taste. You can kind of figure it out listening to the record. So let's go over to the Kurzweil and recreate this from scratch. Okay, here we are on the Kurzweil, and compared to the Mini Moog, this is definitely a little more complicated. We can just grab knobs on the Mini Moog and turn them and get the sound we want fairly quickly, but that's because the Mini Moog is a very simple synthesizer. And of course, the Kurzweil is a modern workstation with about 8 billion different options, and it's much more complex and therefore a little more difficult to program and maybe a little more difficult to wrap your head around. But I'm going to try to simplify it for you as much as I can. Okay, so we're going to start with this clear program, and if I play it, it's just a piano patch. And that means it's using the sampling engine in the Kurzweil, and we want to use the virtual analog engine. So what I would suggest is once we make like a basic patch, you save that as kind of a basic virtual analog patch, and then you can use that as your starting point when you want to create another synthesizer sound, another lead sound like this. But how do we do that in the first place? Well, we're going to go into Edit, and the first thing we want to do is go over to our key map, and we can see that we're on layer 1. There's only one layer 1 of 1, and we have this key map right here, which is controlling the samples. This is where all our samples are contained, is within this key map, but we don't want samples, so we just want to set this to 0. So I'm going to press 0 on the keypad way over here on the right that you can't see out of frame, and I'm going to press Enter. And now we have no key map, we have no sound, and we got kind of a blank slate here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is go over to our algorithm page right here. And we've got this basic algorithm set up. Now in V.A.S.T synthesis, what we have is basically 6 little DSP slots. Now on this screen you can only see 5. But if we switch algorithms, like here's algorithm 2, we can see all 6 right here. Okay, so why are some slots bigger than others? In fact, here's one that's 4 slots big. See that? It's because each layer has a certain amount of DSP that it can do, and some DSP options take more processing than others. And so they have to use bigger slots. They basically combine 2 slots or 4 slots to get more DSP to be able to emulate what they're trying to emulate. In this case, what we want to use are the virtual analog oscillators, the really beautiful non-aliasing analog oscillators. I'll show you if we go over to this little 6-slot one and we try to find a saw wave in here. If we use our buttons to go down, select this. We have sine, saw, square, palm, that's all fine. We can use these and they'll be fine. But if we then try to use a filter, you can see there's no filter in here. There's an all pass, a low pass, high pass, very simple filters, no poles on those, no resonance is what I should say. Okay, so we can definitely use this algorithm and just put our saw in there and we'll be fine. But for ease of use, I'm just going to stick with algorithm 1 because that's what it defaults to. And we'll put our saw in this first slot and we should hear something. Look at that. Okay, again, if we try to put a filter in, we are very limited in what filters we can use. We can use a low pass, high pass, but there's no resonance on those. What we're looking for is a 4-pole low pass filter modeled after the Moog, which is a 4-pole 24 dB resonant low pass filter based on the transistor ladder design. Okay, If we go over to this 2-slot or 2-space slot here, we can see we have some more options in this one than we did in the other one. We have a 2-pole all-pass filter. We have a 2-pole low-pass. We have a notch filter. And that's about it, but we still don't have a 4-pole. Okay, and that's why we need another layer. With another layer, we can add in that big 4-slot or 4-space slot that we saw, and we can add in our filter. Okay, so that's where the confusion, I think, comes in, is sometimes you need multiple layers to do something simple as adding a filter to a waveform. Now, why is that? I think it's probably related to backwards compatibility. In other words, I can take K2000 programs from 30 years ago and load them into this modern K2700. I can't think of any other manufacturer that lets you do that. Take sounds that old and load them into their modern flagship synthesizer. It's pretty remarkable. But I think in order to allow that to happen, they had to keep this architecture relatively the same. So what that means is that each layer has a limited amount of DSP, and if you need more DSP to emulate something that requires that, then you're going to need a second layer. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so let's get back to this. We got layer 1. Let's set it to a saw wave. We've got our saw. Great. Now we need to add a filter. And like I said, we need a low-pass 4-pole Moog style filter. We can only do that with a separate layer. So the first thing we need to do is go over here to new layer, hit that, boom. Now we have layer 2 of 2. The second thing we need a way to route the audio, the signal, from our first layer into the second layer. And to do that, we need to choose a different algorithm. The first 28 of these algorithms are different combinations with different routing. You can see these little lines going everywhere, routing different signals into other places. It allows you to do like cross modulation, that kind of stuff. Once we get to algorithm 28, and if we go above that, we now have algorithm 101. And if you notice, 101 looks exactly like algorithm 1. Same amount of slots, same 2-space slot right there. But the difference is we have this little line coming in from the left. That's our input line. That allows us to input another layer into this layer, and then you can cascade the layers together. That's exactly what we want. And we can do that with this alt input parameter right here. So if we set this to layer 1, now layer 1 is coming into this layer. Okay? Like I said, we need a low-pass Moog filter, so we actually need to go to algorithm 105 to get this big slot. And then once we go down and start cycling through, you can see we have a bunch of different options in here than we did before, including our 4-pole Moog, notice the spelling, trademark, low-pass filter. So there we go. And we can kind of hear a sound in the background now. It's very low. That's the filter sound. However, we can still hear layer 1. So let's choose layer 1 by using these buttons here. And we actually need to turn layer 1 down, because what we have right now are 2 layers that are in parallel. One is feeding into the other, but they're both outputting their own signal. We need to turn this layer down now, because we don't want to hear it by itself. We want to hear it going through the next layer. In other words, we want to hear it going through the filter. So we do that by scrolling over to our DSP control page. And then we have all these neat parameters. We just go down to level. We're going to turn this all the way down to -96 dB. So now we're only hearing the filter level. Okay. So if we go to layer 2 on the same page, there's our filter right there. It's set to 262 hertz, which is why it's so dim. If we turn this up, there's our filter. Isn't that cool? Let's leave it at C4 for right now. Okay, the next thing we need to do is, well, Well, I'll open it up so you can hear it a little better. We have polyphony, and we don't want polyphony, right? Mini Moog is monophonic. It can only play one note at a time. So we need to change that. That's done in the common page. We go over to common, go down to monophonic, turn that on. It automatically has some portamento on. That was another key to our sound. I'm going to turn the rate down just a little bit, down to about 40. Oops, I forgot one thing. Notice we have velocity as well. We don't want that. So let's go back into the DSP control, make sure we're on layer 2 of 2, go to the level, and then go to this velocity track right there and turn it to 0. Now we have no velocity. We're in monophonic. It's sounding great so far. Okay, so now it's all about envelopes. Because you can see our sound is decaying. And we don't really want it to do that. We want it to hold as long as we're holding a note. And then when we release the note, we want the filter to close. So we have to use 2 different envelopes to do that. The first one we need to use is the amp envelope. And right now it's set to natural, which is how a piano works. That's like the standard for a piano. That's why it's decaying. Almost like we pressed a piano key. We want to change this to user. And now you can see it stays, it sustains as long as I hold the key. As soon as I let go of the key, it just turns off. Well, on our sound on our Mini Moog, remember when I let go of the key, the sound persisted and the filter closed. So that's the first thing we want to do, is we want to add a release time to it. So here's our release parameter right here. The amount is on the bottom, the time is at the top. So let's set this to about 3 seconds or so. Great, that's perfect. That sounds great. Now, the last thing we need to do is we need to assign an envelope to the filter, allowing that envelope to modify the filter and therefore create the closing filter sound that we had on the Mini Moog. So we're going to do that with envelope 2. We've got 2 more envelopes that we can play with, envelope 2, envelope 3. We're going to do it with envelope 2. The first thing we need to do is assign envelope 2 to modify the filter. And we do that in the DSP mod page right here. And we go up to our filter frequency and we go over to this list and we assign a source to it. And there's a bunch of sources. This is like a big mod matrix is what this is. So we have to scroll through here and find our envelopes, which are, we're getting close. Almost, there we go. There's the amp envelope, there's the envelope 2. And then we want to control how much of that envelope is affecting the filter. Let's turn this up to about, let's start at 4,000, see if that does us any good. Okay, now we want to close down our filter to about C4. So let's open this up a little bit more with our depth. That's pretty good. Let's add some resonance. Let's go over to the resonance. We're getting there. So now the last thing we need to do is go back to envelope 2 and we need to add a release of the filter should close when it releases. So let's add about a 3-second release, maybe 2 seconds. And let's do our amount here. We're going to go negative because we want it to close. Ooh, that sounds good, doesn't it? Let's go back to our DSP mod page. Go back up to our filter frequency. So you just got to start playing with these until you get them to where you want. I want to go back to envelope 2. Close it down faster, maybe 1 second. Ooh, that sounded pretty good, isn't it? We're getting there. Okay, back to the mod page. Let's add a little bit more resonance. I like that. We're getting there. So that's a good starting point. We can keep tweaking this to our liking, but this is a great starting point. So let's remember the last aspect of that sound, or maybe not the last, but another aspect of that sound is the second oscillator that's tuned 2 octaves above the first. In order to recreate that, we need to add 2 more layers. We need to basically double what we've just done. It's very simple to do. We can go to layer 1, go over here to duplicate layer, go to layer 2, duplicate that one. Great. Go to our algorithm page and make sure that on layer 4, which is our filter, that it's being fed by layer 2, or actually layer 3 this time. Now we can hear some comb filtering because they're tuned exactly the same, so let's detune them. I'm going to actually detune the first layer by an octave, and then we're going to go to layer 3, which is our second oscillator, and we're going to bump that up by an octave. See, we're almost there. We need to add a little bit more resonance maybe, and we need to do it on both. That's sounding pretty good. That's sounding pretty good. Under our control menu, we can make this, we can add some drive into our filter. We can go to our layer 1, which is our oscillator. We can make these, we can do our Hertz detune, which I talked about before. So let's put this about -40. That adds some fatness. We can do our cents detune, maybe 2 for oscillator 1, maybe 4 cents off. And then oscillator 2, we can make it 4 cents the other way. Look at that. That's sounding really good, isn't it? Okay, so I know what you're thinking. We need vibrato. In order to create vibrato, we actually have to assign a LFO to do it, and then we have to assign the LFO to the mod wheel. So let's go do that. We got LFO 1. We'll do a sine wave. Let's do a rate of about 7 hertz or so, minimum and maximum. Okay. Let me go back to our mod page. All right, so to add the vibrato, now that we've got our LFO rate and everything set, we need to assign that LFO to the pitch. So we go over here to our DSP mod page, we go to saw pitch, and we go to source 2. And source 2 is going to be our LFO, so let's find our LFO. There it is, LFO 1. The depth control is going to be our mod wheel, so we press and hold enter and you move the mod wheel, and there it is. And then we can set our minimum depth and our maximum depth. Let's just set these to 1,000 for now. See what it does. Sorry, minimum depth should be 0. And then as we turn up the mod wheel, only one oscillator is being affected by that, and that's the high oscillator. We need to do this on both oscillators. So this might be something that you do before duplicating the layers, but I kind of messed that up. So same thing, it doesn't take long. Source 2, LFO 1, there we go. Depth control, press enter, move the mod wheel, 0, 1000. And of course we need to actually, every layer can have its own LFO too. So yeah, this would have been something we should have done before we duplicated the layer. That was my mistake. So we got to do the same thing here. LFO 1, we need to set to like 7 hertz. There we go. 7 hertz. Shape, sine wave. So there we go. If we want to assign that to aftertouch like I did on my original sound, that's not a problem. We just go, instead of mod wheel, we press and hold enter and press the key harder. And we have to do that on both layers. And if that's too much aftertouch, we can just turn down the depth on both layers. Let's do 500. So we're getting there. And the last thing we need to do is do the effects, which we can't do on the Mini Moog, but we can do in here. So this has been kind of long. I hope you kind of understand what's going on here. But we're using 4 layers. The first layer is our oscillator 1. Second layer is a filter for oscillator 1. Third layer is oscillator 2. Fourth layer is the filter for oscillator 2. And this is why people think that, you know, digital synths are more complicated and harder to program. They are, of course, because there's a billion different things you can do with them. But once you wrap your head around how they work, it's absolutely not that difficult. It's just a little more time consuming. The thing I love about V.A.S.T is that it's so flexible in what you can do with it. And I also love that they actually list things in hertz and in, you know, cents and stuff like that, instead of in some random, you know, scale that nobody knows what it means. Like you open up a filter in another synth and it's like 0 to 127. 0 to 127 what? What does that represent? Here it's in hertz. You know exactly where the filter is. I just love that. I just love that. Anyway, let's do the effects real quick and then we can wrap this thing up. So the effects will affect your stereo routing. So any kind of stereo routing, you don't need to worry about in the common page or in the output page, I should say. We'll leave all that stuff alone because we're going to do it in the effects. One thing I should mention too is that each layer can have its own effects. We have layer effects here, but we're not going to mess with those either. We're just going to do our standard effects. The first thing we want to do for this is, remember, we want the left side to come out first and then delay just a single echo for the right side. So we're going to have to make a custom delay to do that. I've already done that, but I'll do it again just to show you. Okay, so what we can do is we can choose any delay here, and then we can edit it and change it to what we want. So let's just choose a basic delay. How about this one? Press the edit button. Here's our basic delay. Now we can choose in here our slapback. So let's choose this wide slapback. This is the one we want. Press edit again to edit this. So now we have our left and right. We want our left to be 0% wet. Okay. And we want our right to be 100% wet. And then on page 2, we can set our actual delay times. Let's set this to about 400 milliseconds. Oops, sorry. 400. Maybe about 350 might be better. There we go. So we're done. You need to save this effect as in its own slot. I'm not going to do that because I've already done that. We're actually going to, no, I don't want to save it. I'm going to load up my my own one that I already made, which is right here. Sounds great, doesn't it? Okay. So again, we can go back in and we can start tweaking some of the things I showed in the other video, including this, like, you know, filter kind of stuff where you can change the drive of the filter, which is right, where is it? Velocity track of the filter, the velocity track of the filter, that allows the filter to have more resonance as we go down, right here if we're under the resonance thing. Or not velocity, key track, I'm sorry. Yep, and then we can do the on the oscillator layers, the thing where we make it go out of tune, but by using this Hertz thing like I was showing you. Sounds great. You can tweak it to your heart's content, but that's the basic sound right there. So creating a mini Moog style lead sound on the Kurzweil is actually quite easy. Relatively speaking, not as easy as a mini Moog. But now that we've got this kind of set up, this could be like a template. You could save this as a template and then create some other sounds. And one thing you have to remember on these old synths, there's not that many waveforms that they use. They use sawtooth, they use square wave, they used triangle wave and sine waves. That's pretty much it. So most likely these classic sounds are going to be some combination of those things. They're usually square or sawtooth waves. And then some kind of filter, either a 4-pole filter resonant or a 2-pole filter resonant. And it's really just as simple as dissecting the sound first and then recreating it inside of here. So I just deleted that and we go to my sound. So this is essentially set up the same way. If we go in here, I'll show you. This is the one that I created before. We have our sawtooth wave, we have our 4-pole Moog, we have another 4-pole Moog, and we have another sawtooth. They're kind of in reverse, but it doesn't really matter as long as the right layers is going into the filter. And then DSP control, you know, I have my fine tuning, I've got my free running oscillator, which helps make it a little more realistic. In other words, the oscillator is always running in the background. It doesn't start each time you press the key. You know, for the filters, we've got our 20 decibel per negative 0.2 decibel per key on the resonance. Let's look at our envelopes. You can see we just got our release. For the filter, we got our release for the main amp. It's 4.4 seconds, so it's a little bit more than it was before. I softened the attack a little bit just so it wasn't so clicky at the beginning. There's our LFO, which is, you know, it's all this stuff is just basic stuff. It's basically the same. The sound I've tweaked a lot more, so it's a little closer to the real thing. But I think if you follow this tutorial, you should be able to do this yourself and get a sound that you're happy with. And then you can do stuff like this. Here's my Welcome to the Machine bass sound. It's using the same general idea, right? We have 4 layers. The first layer, if we go to our algorithm, is some saw waves. Second layer is our third layer is our filter. We have our noise, which is controlled by the mod wheel. Not sure what the second layer is doing. It might not be doing jack squat. Isn't that cool? And the way I've got this one set up is I actually have an arpeggiator playing half notes. And then the delay that we set up before, it's slightly different timing, but the delay is doing the left-right thing. So the first note is in the left side, the second note's in the right side through the delay. Kind of cool, huh? And I got this one, which is our, I've got this one. And this one is set up to be, let's look at our algorithm here. First layer is sawtooth wave, 4-pole Moog, noise. It's essentially the same as the other one, just slightly different settings for the filter. And then we have an LFO that's modifying the filter. Oh, there it is. So yeah, so here's our filter. It's being modified by LFO1. Its depth is controlled by the slider. It's the same basic concept as the other one. It's just how you put those basic parameters together. So I hope this helped. I think it's worth exploring the power of this instrument a little more rather than just relying on getting presets from other people, because when you're recreating these classic sounds, there's really not that much to them. I realize that a lot of the sounds that are in here might not be very useful because they're, you know, they got tons of effects on them. That's a good one. But, you know, a good starting point, too, is to take a preset like this, start to pull it apart and see how it's made. This only has 5 layers. So we've got a 2-pole filter here, 2-pole filter here, 2-pole filter here. Wow, it's like all 2-pole filters. Where's the oscillators? Is it sample-based? Let's go look. Is it sample-based? Yes, it is. So you can see through this key map that it's just using samples of a saw wave from something. Not sure what they sampled for that. Sounds good though. And then they're just using a series of filters. Oops, a series of filters to do what they want to do with it. A series of low pass filters and notch filters. That's pretty cool. Pretty smart. Let me turn the camera ever so slightly. These buttons over here can solo or mute the active layer. So right now we're on layer 1. Let's see what this one's doing. So you can't hear it, but it's panned all the way to the right. So here's the next layer. Panned all the way to the left. So they have 5 layers, and they're basically, the first 2 are panned to the left, or left and right. The second 2 are panned to the left and right, and then the third one is a stereo layer. And they're all just sample based. So we could build this same thing using the virtual oscillators if we wanted. We could also load in our own multi-samples of some classic synthesizers. Let me move this back and do it that way. I think this is very instructive, is to look at these things. Some of the better synth sounds are the ones that are back in the middle here. So like these. Yeah, it's kind of cool. That's an emulation. These are FM sounds. Let's try to find a analog sound here like this. So you could take a sound like this and start pulling it apart and see how it's made. The key maps are just silent, so there's no samples. These should be, yes, virtual analog oscillators. So it has 3 layers. Each layer is the same. It's got a sawtooth and going into a 2-pole filter. Sounds like that filter is being modified by an envelope. Yep, an envelope. Envelope 2, if we go look at envelope 2, we can see it's doing that shape. So that explains that. We could turn loop on, so it actually loops that. Kind of cool, right? So that this kind of stuff is a good way to learn how this is working. Just taking apart these patches and seeing how they work. A lot of my patches when I first started were based on the Moog solo, lead solo sound, which is in here somewhere. I don't know exactly where it is. But that's what my friend Dave Weiser suggested I do, is use that as my basis and then start building things off there. And it was a good one to do. I like this sound too. That's a cool one. But now that I've started to make these, it's a lot easier to just do them from scratch because I know exactly what I want. And you know, I didn't make this sound. This is a great one. So good, but yep. I hope this helped. It's a kind of a long video, but to me, it makes sense once you dig into it and wrap your head around it. The big thing to know is to use your layers appropriately, to use your DSP control and your DSP mods on those different slots and different layers so you can do what you need to do. These are your main pages right here, right in this section right here. Alrighty. Hopefully you can program your own cool Welcome to the Machine lead and be proud of yourself for doing so. Take care. We'll talk to you later.